It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. First, we'll hear from Dr. Ron Fitzmartin, a senior advisor with the Data Standards Branch in the Office of Regulatory Operations with the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. We'll also be hearing from Dr. Olof Lagerlund, a substance expert with the Uppsala Monitoring Center with the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for International Drug Monitoring. And we'll also hear from Chen, a project management officer with the Office of Strategic Programs with the for Drug Evaluation and Research. So please now join me in welcoming our first presenter, Dr. Ron Fitzmartin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. First, I'd like to extend my thanks to the CEDAR SBIA for making this webinar possible today. We're here to discuss an important aspect of healthcare, global IDMP implementation, and how we're getting closer to achieving this ambitious goal. I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleagues TJ Chen from CEDAR and Olof Lagerlund from the Uppsala Monitoring Center in Sweden. We've made significant strides toward global IDMP implementation. And today we'll share insights on where we are, where we're heading, and how we can continue to work together toward achieving full implementation. But let's start with the basics. IDMP is a suite of 5 ISO standards that were officially released in 2012. These standards were developed to standardize the identification of medicinal products and the substances they contain. But why is this standardization necessary? In the world of global healthcare, products and substances are manufactured, distributed, and administered across different countries with varying regulations and systems. Without a unified framework, there is a higher risk of miscommunication, errors in product tracking, and inconsistencies in patient safety measures. IDMP solves this by providing standardized identifiers for several key elements. The Medicinal Product Identifier, MPID, is assigned at the national or regional level. Pharmaceutical Product ID, or PhPID, provides a global identifier for pharmaceutical products. And the Substance Identifier, which ensures that active substances in a product are consistently identified across borders. It also covers dose forms, routes of administration, strengths, and units of measurement. To give an example, imagine a medicinal product being sold in 2 different countries. In one country, it's packaged as 50 tablets, and in another, it's packaged as 100 tablets. The national or regional MPID and the package ID, or PCIDs, would differ, but the global PhPID and the substance identifier remain the same, ensuring consistency in the identification of the product itself. Let's explore some of the real-world benefits of IDMP implementation. Perhaps the most significant benefit of IDMP is in the realm of safety and pharmacovigilance. By standardizing how we identify medicinal products, IDMP ensures that we can track the life cycle of products more accurately and reliably. This allows for faster reporting and assessment of adverse events across borders. With standardized data elements, regulatory authorities can quickly identify and address potential safety issues. More reliable post-market surveillance is a key outcome here, as it enables authorities to monitor products once they are on the market, catching issues earlier and preventing harm to patients. For example, an adverse event that's reported in one region having consistent product identifiers would allow for immediate cross-reference with the same product being used elsewhere in the world. This means faster action and more effective solutions. Now let's turn to medicinal product shortages. When supply chain disruptions occur, whether due to manufacturing delays, regulatory issues, or global emergencies, IDMP can help identify alternative products that would meet the same medical need. This is possible because of the global PhPID and standardized data, which link products across jurisdictions. This capability is especially critical during emergencies, like a pandemic, where rapid identification of a substitute product can help maintain continuity of care. IDMP's standardized identifiers allow for seamless tracking of medicinal products in these situations, minimizing the risk of shortages affecting patient outcomes. Global cross-border healthcare. This is common, has become increasingly common. Patients are traveling all the time between countries for treatment, and healthcare providers need to ensure that their medication histories are accurately understood and communicated. IDMP facilitates this by providing standardized, unambiguous identifiers for medicinal products, regardless of the country of origin. So a patient receiving treatment in one country may have their prescription filled with a different branded product in another country. But thanks to IDMP, the healthcare provider in the new country will know exactly what that product is and how it relates to what the product has been taking, ensuring consistent and safe care. And lastly, IDMP is key to achieving interoperability between different healthcare systems and regulatory frameworks. With standardized identifiers in place, different IT systems can communicate seamlessly. This is especially important as healthcare becomes more and more digitized. IDMP provides a common language that enables all these systems to exchange data efficiently and accurately, improving coordination and overall healthcare delivery. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Global IDMP Working Group, or GIDWG. The group was officially chartered in 2021, following a WHO IDMP workshop in 2019. Before the GIDWG, there was no single organization focused on demonstrating that IDMP standards could be implemented globally. We recognize the need for an entity to drive this effort, ensuring that the standards are not only adopted but fit for global use. Our main goal: to develop and execute projects that demonstrate the practical application of the IDMP standards across different regions. These projects focus on harmonizing identifiers, building a sustainable regulatory framework, and developing business rules and best practices. Through these efforts, we aim to maintain the global identifiers for medicinal products and ensure they can be used effectively in real-world healthcare settings. Our working group consists of a wide array of member organizations, as you can see here, regulatory authorities and industry via the IFPMA. Each of these groups brings a unique perspective and a set of expertise, helping us to address the diverse challenges of global implementation. These collaborations are key to our progress, as they ensure that the framework we develop is robust, scalable, and aligned with the needs of different regions. The GIDWG has initiated several important projects since its inception. To highlight a few, substance. We've been working on mapping substance identifiers across different regions, such as EU, FDA, and others, in order to create a global substance identifier, which Olof will talk about more detail later. This will help harmonize how substances are tracked across the globe. Dose form. We are also mapping dose form across regions, formalizing business rules to ensure clarity and consistency. Strength representation. We are working on standardizing how strength is represented across regions, ensuring that both presentation strength and concentration strength are clearly defined and consistent. Operating model. We are developing, or have developed, I should say, a consensus-based operating model for WHO UMC to serve as the international maintenance organization for the global PhPID. And finally, we are actively participating in the development of the HL7 fire resources that support the exchange of IDMP data across IT systems globally. We also have been conducting end-to-end testing. You'll hear more about that as well, to assess the readiness of the global PhPID service. This testing has been rigorous, covering both technical, and operational aspects. It includes load and stress testing to ensure that system can handle real-world demands. Our testing framework is comprehensive and has already covered a data set of 150 substances representing around over 2,000 medicinal products. The aim is to harmonize medicinal product information and generate global PhPIDs, which we believe will greatly enhance, as I mentioned before, pharmacovigilance, drug shortage management, and cross-border healthcare. These tests are a key milestone on our journey toward full global IDMP implementation. GIDWG's journey thus far. We finished the first phases of the 5 projects and the end-to-end testing. A full report is now in development and will be published hopefully by the end of the year. We held our 4th Global IDMP Working Group meeting, stakeholder meeting in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It brought together regulatory authorities, industry leaders, and other stakeholders to advance the global implementation of ISO IDMP. The event was attended by over 150 participants from 22 countries and focused on evaluating the progress of the IDMP framework with a particular emphasis on the end-to-end testing of global identifiers. With that, I'll conclude my portion of the presentation. Thank you for your attention, and now I'll turn things over to Olof. Take it away, Olof.
Thank you, Ron, for that very nice overview and introduction to the global implementation of the IDMP and the GIDWG end-to-end. Let me introduce myself. I'm Olof Lagerlund, and I work as a substance expert at the Uppsala Monitoring Center, UMC. And basically, I work with substances through the whole spectra, but a lot with classifications, amongst other things. But I also nowadays am involved in ISO Working Group 6 together with Ron and TJ, and I also manage the GIDWG Substance project. But enough about me, and time to dive into the actual presentation. Here is a short agenda for today. We will talk about the global identifiers and how we try to work with them in connection with the global implementation. And I would say that the collaboration and compromises are the keys to make everyone more or less happy with this. And I'll go through the different identifiers, start with the PhPID and then its building blocks, and then move on to some other outcomes from the GIDWG end-to-end in the last part of the presentation. But let's start with a pharmaceutical ID, or the PhPID for short. You may have seen this slide before, but I think it's worth pointing out how the 5 ISO IDMP standards are connected. And as you see to your left, you have the substance, strength, and dose form. That's the 11238, 11239, and 11240 standards. Although those together comprise the PhPID, the different levels, which is explained in the 11616. But just having that isn't, as I will show you later as well, you would need products as well. And the products and their MPIDs are described in the 11615, as you can see to the right. In the bottom there where you have the carton, how it then contains a pill that's sort of described by the PhPID, which in turn is described by the 3 other IDs. But before diving into the exact details of the identifiers, we will talk a bit. I will just show you like how we worked and what we did in the end-to-end. We had medicinal products, comparable products from Brazil, US, Canada, Switzerland, EMA, represented by Croatia, Greece, and France, where we looked at the labels, the SPCs from these, and extracted information about substance, the strength, and the dose from them. And we could then, with the help of business rules that we had in GIDWG and the ISO standards, construct a PhPID. And a main thing when we talk about this in the global sense is to make the harmonize products, because they are differently described between different regulators across the globe. Some I'll come into more details about it, but the thing is we try to get that so products that are comparable or that similar, they should be grouped together with the PhPID. And sometimes they shouldn't. But that means that you sometimes have to disregard some granular information. So you lose some information in some cases. And in some cases, you actually need to do some assumptions. I know that's not really what regulators want, but most of the time. And neither do we. But sometimes it's necessary. But what we strive for is that, as you can see on the right, you can see the word lagom. It's a Swedish word, and it means just what it says below. Not too little, not too much, but just right. So let's move on to one important part that we maybe not discovered during the end, but it became much more apparent. Because we built the end-to-end on the use cases, pharmacovigilance, drug shortage, and cross-border healthcare, prescription mainly. And when we did this evaluation with this, before we have notions that it's important to consult with experts, but we really got that understanding during the end-to-end that we don't only need experts when it comes to the actual ISO standards and how to deal with the dose form, but we also need expert for the different use cases and try to combine them to see where this harmonization degree should be. What's useful in one case might not be in another use case, and to find those compromises to make this a useful global ID. Another thing that we saw that was very useful and we are working was to really look at different regions. We have it here as 5 regions. It could be depending how you divide the world, but having look at something from North America, Europe, Asia, maybe LATAM, for instance, to see how are the products described and what are the similarities and discrepancies. And so we could do that and see which is the most common way, for instance, globally. And it's proved very useful in many cases, but it also takes time. So only to do that when it's relevant, and be careful because it won't tell the whole truth because you pick a number of products from the world, but at least it gives you a better vantage point from the beginning. So that was also a good thing. So when we put these together, both the 5 region verification, talking with the expert, we construct business rules. We try to reduce the variations on the medicinal product information. Not on the actual information, but so we can say that these are similar enough to be considered to have the same PhPID. Finding that lagom spot right in the middle. It's important for us and for what we see to be able to have a global implementation of this. And if you have a local implementation, regional, it can be more narrow. it can be there, and then we can group them together at the global level, for instance. The PhPID consists of 3 parts: substance, strength, and dose form, as you know. But we'll start with a substance. We assigned a global ID based on the ISO 11238 standard and its technical specification, the 19844. There are also naming organizations such as the International Non-Proprietary Name, the INN, or USAN, and different pharmacopoeias. That's also naming monographs and substances in a way. And in most cases, I would say these align. But of course, we need to standardize things that everything was already standardized. So they can differ slightly. But if they do, we do investigate with the help of the GIDWG expert and see how we'll do that. Can we align where the difference is? Is it something that needs to be amended in ISO? Of course, we can do that. But in most cases, it works quite fine, and you can see still use the ISO standards as long as you then connect it to the right name. It can be, for instance, with hydrates, can be tricky there, where a monograph name can be only like morphine sulfate, but it actually contained the pentahydrate. But I'll get back to hydrates in a minute. And there are some tricky parts that we have been able to solve, of course, then with some business rules. But we also have some cases which has been tricky with mainly complex biologics and old legacy products where you don't have all the information you want. A short description of how we work with the GSID assignments. We don't assign GSIDs just to assign a GSID. Right now, at least, we do it via the request of a PhPID. So if you want a PhPID for a certain product, we take what's in that product, what substance, and we assign a substance ID. We import it from FDA SRS or other SRS systems, hopefully in the future as well, or other sources can be used if we don't have any US or EU substances, for instance. We can take it somewhere else and create it ourselves, of course, in the UMC SRS, which is the same software as the FDA uses. We review it because it's not always the same like name. Like in the US, you have the user names that you want to use, and we prefer to use the international non-proprietary name, the INN, so which should be the preferred term, etc. And sometimes you do small fixes to align, and we always consult with the GIDWG expert team if there are any issues at all. But we look if they fulfill the ISO minimal fields, and if they do, well, then they get the GSID, and if they don't, right now, we set a stop to that. And perhaps there will be exceptions for older, like I said, legacy biologics or something with limited information. But we start with the ones that we actually know we have fulfilled the requirements. One thing that we worked with substance and it comes to like a business rules that we have seen is that we have it's when it comes to hydrates, they are very differently described across the world. They are included sometimes and sometimes not, and it's hard really to say that this should be here or not. But then during the end-to-end, we have looked at it with the use cases before, and seen that for the use cases, it doesn't really matter if we have hydrates included or not. So we continue to use the anhydrous substance instead, because then you get that grouping, that harmonization on the right level according to the use cases. Hydrates are important in other use cases, but not in these ones that we have looked into so far for the global PhPID. So that was a bit about the substance, and moving on to strength. Some different challenges with strength. For instance, unit expression when they mean the same thing, like percentage instead of milligram per gram. It could be rounding of numbers, like 18 versus 18.06 as we have here, and it's also, does the label express concentration, or is it presentation strength for liquids? So all these things are sometimes around and not that very easy always to find the right way to really know, is this comparable? Is this really the same, depending on density, for instance, or other things? And are we sure that 1.3 is the same as 1.35? Or is it a rounding error, or is it an actual difference that should be reflected? So, of course, business rules. We also use patterns. That's sort of a specific business rules when it comes to having, like, you should treat tablets in one way, and you go with capsules in the same way, but if you have a liquid, then you go another way, sort of. Some predetermined patterns to help us deal with how to classify the different strength, what to use. We also use conversion tables, and I'll show you that in a minute. And units, we always try to use the UCOM units when there is one available. And if there isn't one available, we try to use the most common one used globally. And if we can find some documentation that supports that, that's excellent. But hopefully we can use UCOM units in most cases. One thing with the strength unit conversion, it's when we do this, trying to see, okay, we have milligrams and we have international units, and they are comparable. But which one should we use? And what support do we need to be able to say that yes, we can transfer these international units into milligram or the other way around? Well, here are some examples where we have some different substances, where we have had international units that we transform to milligram based on, in one case, the top one, on what's in the SPCs. It's something like a product can have both in it in some countries, but only like milligram in another country. Or we can find it like for lenogastrim or somatropin, we have conversion tables in Martindale, for instance, where we can find those and transfer. And we try to use the most common one, the one you can find in the most countries. When, for instance, we do this 5-region verification, we try to see that, oh, they use milligram in 5-6 countries, but only international units in one, and then they use it together with the milligram. So then we figure that it's mainly milligrams that's used, so it will be easier to find. So that's what it says here to the right. So we want to minimize the number of conversions. But sometimes that's tricky, sometimes it's 50-50, and then you have to choose, of course. But hopefully we can make it global. The dose form. Dose form is basically the same thing. There's no centralized terminology for dose form. And the ones we have across the globe is different granularity. It can be capsules instead of, and sometimes you have soft to hard capsule, or a tablet can be coated tablet or film coated tablet. You also have different terms approved, like pellet versus granula. And it's not that you can map a lot of these one to one or one to many, but in the end, it's very difficult to get that mapping right. And there's quite a lot of different terminologies out there. So in order to work with this, we have used the dose form attributes instead. And of course, business rules. I'll come back here and explain the dose form attributes. The global dose form attributes are based on the EDQM dose form attributes, but not entirely. We're not using all, as I'll show. We start with a basic dose form, the administrable basic dose form, because in PhPID it's stipulated that you should use the administrable product. So we use the basic dose form. We also use the administration method, the intended site, and the release characteristics. So these four attributes comprises the global dose form attributes. And in EDQM, you also have a manufactured basic dose form and transformation. But since we don't use them in the PhPID, we ignore them. But it's up here for you to see. It can be, for instance, that you have a powder and then you can dissolve it. Then you get the administrable dose form, which is a solution. We sometimes sidestep from that also in the global, because we have to use like the strength. Then we have the presentation strength. That's actually based on a manufactured basic dose form. But we won't go into that much detail today. One example of where we have worked quite a bit and that's been tricky is the release characteristics. In some countries you have labels like the delayed release, and in another country it's called modified release, but it's basically the same thing. And you can also have like controlled release or modified release indicated that something is special about this form of delivery, but not exactly which release characteristic. Here are some examples. We have quite a few different trade names, as you can see, and different formulations fixing where methicillin should be taken up in the body, pH dependent, time dependent, or mixture. And we can have it can be both a delayed thing or it can be a prolonged thing, so it works longer. Or you can have a formulation that incorporates both delayed and prolonged. And when we do talk about this, we only want to have one RCA for one PhPIDs. So these formulations where you had both prolonged and delayed, we assigned prolonged instead of that. And also we're trying to harmonize these terms, like if it says modified, so we just use a few different ones of the terms. Because it's the differences are so great worldwide. So we want to narrow it down a bit. But basically, only one RCA is used for one PhPID. And now we have discussed identifiers quite a bit and how we try to harmonize, and I'm giving you some examples of that. But I'll show you some other outcomes of the end-to-end and some other use case business rules as well, where we try to harmonize, but on a different level than what we've seen as an outcome. We have an operating model. We have managed in the end-to-end to actually get develop request service, how we can work with it within our systems, and how to publish the PhPIDs. And this was really fine. It needs some fine tuning, but we can basically start working with it and assign PhPIDs. So that's a very good thing. When it comes to actually assignment and what we managed, we can look at the left one first, substances. And there were 96% of the substances was successfully assigned a GSID. And the 4% that we didn't assign a GSID was that I showed you before that it didn't really fulfill the ISO minimal fields. At least at this moment, we couldn't agree to, because we didn't have information or conflicting information, and mainly complex biologics and older legacy products. And sometimes it was also confidential information, because we only right now at the global level work with marketed products with non-confidential information. And some of these small things can be that you know it at the FDA or EMA or any other regulatory authority, but we shouldn't be using that. But all of these are sort of solvable in the longer picture. We have to the right, we have the number of PhPIDs we assigned, and we assigned about 90% about all the products we got in. And out of those 10%, about half is dependent on the substances that we didn't assign PhPIDs for. And the other half is, I would say, findings that we have discussed here today that we haven't really then, because this was before we took all the decisions, but we saw that, for instance, there were issues with release characteristics. But now, when we decided how to move on, we can take a great proportion of those 5% that's left and assign PhPIDs. But there are still some categories that we also need to investigate a bit further to know if we're going in the right direction and harmonize in the right way. But I would say most of these are solvable, and we will get there. So this is very positive. And during the end, I could also mention that we didn't just take, the easy chemical things. That's sort of that we could have gone out of this testing with 100% just to show good numbers. But I was actually surprised that we got this good numbers with regards to the tricky things we choose. So let's see if we can find more tricky things in the future and see how to work with that. I talked a lot about business rules, and as you imagine, there's a lot more than we just went through today. And these will be published later this year, a public version, which you can find on the GIDWG.org webpage. There you can also find other stuff relating to the GIDWG project. So please go there and have a look. I mentioned that we had an operating model that worked fine. You can see it up here in the right corner as well with the different systems. And it's one thing to have something up and running that you can submit and you can do this, but we also worked in the background, with these. I won't go into detail on this business slide, but we have backup and disaster recovery processes in place. We are monitoring the different tools so we can know. So most of this is fine and ready, and we are having a good technical readiness, I would say, after the intent to move forward for the potential go live later on. We also have what we call the operational readiness, more of the user training and help desk and so on. And the help desk customer support, that's more or less in place. But for instance, we don't have any SLA agreements because no one has really implemented the global PhPIDs in their systems, so they haven't put the requirements on us. How fast do you need a new PhPID? Is it a week, a month, twice a year? It may differ between different stakeholders. So we will get to that as we move on. And the same thing a bit about change management. We have a basic idea on what we need to do and how to do that, but also, since it's no implementation, we are working a bit of requirements. How often should it be? Should it be a daily thing, or updates, or should it be versioned and twice a year, or things like that. We also need to, of course, have more training and documentation, but I guess that come a little bit later. And of course, communication and process readiness. So we're working on all these parts, and some have gone very far with, and some we are starting a bit more, having to do a bit more work with. And I'll show you two more findings from the end-to-end, but first here an example of PhPID for a trastuzumab product. Just like having a PhPID, it doesn't say that much. You see that you get like the substance, strength and dose form, you have a solution, 150 milligram trastuzumab. But it's really, what does that say? You want this PhPID connected to a product. And this could be a product to your ID, and you would have that in a medicinal product dictionary. Either your local one, where you can have your national ID, the MPID, or it could be like the UMC's WHO drug dictionary, a global dictionary. And in WHO drug, you have other things like market authorization holder, you have country of sales, etc. And in your local one, you can have a lot of different things, and that also depends on the stakeholder, which country you are. But the important thing here is that you have something, a local stable ID, like the MPID, that you can connect your product to a specific PhPID. So what we found during the end-to-end is that it's not necessary, but it's very good, and we think that it will facilitate interpretation of data from for everyone. So everyone would benefit if you have a stable local ID that could be included in the request for PhPIDs, and we can do that both in, like, if you request a PhPID in a Excel file or via Fire API. But it's great to have that, because then you can connect the local ID to the PhPID. And if there's a change, for instance, in because we for some reason change something with the PhPID, then that could be reflected back. Oh, you need to change this local ID, this product here, to a new PhPID, for instance. So it has a lot to do with change management and also analysis, we think. So that was one finding I'll talk about. Another finding that also came up that was sort of from all is some sort of overarching PhPID. I'm not certain this is the term that will be used, but let me try to explain and give an example. It's still not fully developed. But in this case, you have levamlodipine as a substance, 5 milligram, because that's what you usually like prescribe or search for, because you don't always search for your exact, as I show you the salt form. But here you don't actually have a product, because you always need to have a salt when you have levamlodipine. So you could have, like in the US, you have a product called levamlodipine, but it contains the levamlodipine maleate and not just levamlodipine. And the strength isn't 5 milligrams, but it's 6.42, and the 5 milligram is the reference strength coming back. The dose form in this case isn't a problem, But here you can then, you have a product and then you can have a PhPID. And then in Brazil, we have this etylope. It's also levamlodipine, but it's the becylate salt this time around. And you have this 6.93 instead of the milligrams. But it's still the same reference amount, right? And you get another PhPID for this one. And you want these to be connected. And this is a way to connect them, perhaps, that you want to be able to search for levamlodipine and then get all these different products with the different salts in them to be able to find that. Now, this is just one example. You can imagine you want to search for levamlodipine 5 milligram, and then you want to get these salts when they have the reference strength 5 milligrams. But this is still under development, and it's how exactly it should be constructed, and it will be for us to try to figure out with the help from the people that will use it, of course, and see what's useful. And it's also been said that we should have, that should be a recommendation to ISO to incorporate that we need some sort of overarching PhPID to improve these aggregation and search functionalities of the PhPIDs to make them really useful from that. Yes, and now the final slide for today from my side. Two things to take home with you. Assignment of the global identifiers and the selection of PhPID are based on the ISO IDMP standards and the GIDWG business rules. So if you're interested in details, you should try to read both of those documents. And maybe the most important is that the work now we have done with the end-to-end has provided confidence to us that we can establish a PhPID global framework which will be able to set PhPIDs for the majority of products coming up. And that's all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present, and I'll have over to TJ, who will tell you about regulatory readiness and FHIR, amongst other things. Over to you, TJ.
All right, thank you, Olof. As Ron mentioned in his presentation, the Global IDMP Implementation Working Group met at Sao Paulo in September 2024. During the meeting, regulators presented challenges, opportunities, and readiness in the implementation of IDMP in their region. Each regulator has their own challenges and is at different stages of implementation, but all regulators are committed to adopt the global IDMP implementation framework. In this section, I will use some of the slides from the regulators and focus on the readiness and opportunities. When ISO first published the IDMP standard in 2012, FDA started a global substance registration system project to upgrade an existing system to be more aligned with ISO 11238. FDA also assessed existing standard against ISO IDMP for conformers. FDA believes that we can maximize the benefit of IDMP when multiple regions have a harmonized approach to implement the standards. In 2019, FDA and EMA established an IDMP collaboration framework. In 2020, under the direction of ISO TC 215 Workgroup 6, FDA and UNC conducted a successful pilot using the combination of dose form characteristics as input to generate PhPID. As a result, use of dose form characteristics to generate PhPID is included in the revised ISO 11239 standard. And then in 2021, EMA, FDA, and WHO UMC chartered the Global IDMP Working Group. Ron has presented the GIDWG activities, and Olof has presented the outcome of end-to-end tests. So I won't go through those here, but I'd like to point out that in 2022, FDA started to draft a guidance on IDMP and published the final guidance in spring 2023. As some of you may know that FDA have been using standards similar to and conform to the IDMP standard for many years. The requirements to assign a unique national drug code to a medicinal product is similar to the requirements by the ISO 11615 to uniquely identify medicinal product and assign an ID. The unique ingredient identifier UNI generated by GSRS is based on ISO 11238, and the GSRS project will import global substance ID generated by UMC so that the GSRS UNI will map to the global substance ID. And besides the GSRS project, FDA FAIRS program and CEDAR integrity product domain all have a placeholder for global PhPID, and we will import and utilize the global PhPID when it is available. FDA's goal is the harmonization of standard for exchange medicinal product data internationally. FDA will continue to work with international partners like WHO UMC, HL7, ISO, GIDWG, and ICH to ensure the standard can be implemented for the key use cases. FDA supports the establishment of framework for the generation and maintenance of global IDMP identifiers, mainly the global PhPID and global substance ID. On the opportunities, we see the global collaboration is the key. With global collaboration, we can respond to drug shortage faster, and we will be able to identify more alternative products across region in the case of drug shortage. We can also respond to the adverse event faster and even conduct proactive pharmacovigilance. So for example, in a region, say region A, that the regulator has received a handful of adverse event reports, which is not enough to do any analysis. But regulator A can then inquire with other regulators to see if they have received similar event with similar product using various level of PhPIDs. Regulator B may respond back and say, hey, we have received somewhere around 80 cases with high concentration on male patient over 60 years old. Region C may also come back and say, hey, we received more than 100 cases and we see a trend associated with high dosage, say 500 milligram, over a long period of continuous use, say 90 days, right? And region D may come back and say, well, we just approved the product and have not received any report yet. So in this case, regulator A and regulator D, or even B and C, can then turn to their healthcare professional and ask them to pay extra attention when they prescribe the product to male patient over 60 years old to avoid that potential adverse effect, and also ask them to do additional evaluation if they need to prescribe the drug for continuous use over 90 days. So by doing so, we can prevent unwanted adverse event to an extent, right? And also so that we can protect our patients and save life. We can also save costs and become more efficient by leverage the analysis done by other regulators. The next two slides are from Isabel Chicaro. EMA implements the IDMP with their Spore Master Data project. EMA implemented ISO 11239 and 11240 in 2017 with their Referential Management Service, the RMS. Substance Management Service Phase 1 was delivered in 2019 with limited functionality and is not fully ISO 11238 compliant. EMA then took over an ISO 11238 compliant EU SRS and is integrated with SMS. EMS Product Management Service cover authorized medicinal product part of ISO 11615. An ISO 11615 compatible format was implemented for data migration and transformation in 2024. EMA will continue to enrich and correct the business rule for the PMS. And for the pharmaceutical product identifier, EMA is going to generate their regional PhPID, but they are working closely to align the regional PhPID with GIDWG generated global PhPIDs. For the opportunities, EMA emphasizes on the benefit of pharmacovigilance, product shortage, and cross-border prescription. And the next set of slides are presented by Leonardo Santos from Anvisa. Anvisa sees IDMP as a strategic program. Leonardo presented a timeline from 2025 to 2027, including purchase of software for IDMP data management, to implement of solution to receive data in the IDMP standard, and to mapping to HL7 file for migration to IDMP standards. Besides the 3 IDMP benefits, Anvisa also identified that implementing IDMP standard can enhance regulatory efficiency, health system interoperability, patient safety, and also international trade of medicines. Philip Wellman presented Swissmedic's strategic goal from 2023 to 2026. Swissmedic will use the state-of-the-art digital technology and become agile and data-centric. IDMP is part of digital transformation of Swissmedic. The implication of implement IDMP at Swissmedic will provide them an external and internal interface for medicinal product data. Marketing authorization holder will be able to view their data in the future, and IDMP will enable them to exchange or synchronize with international databases. Swissmedic also point out that they will not have isolated IDMP implementation. Electronic data will be exchanged via a portal as part of application process, and electronic application form will be used to capture IDMP data. Swissmedic is active in both international and national standard bodies. Their intention is to create a highly compatible and harmonized implementation so that they can be connected to international databases and build solutions based on existing experience. Swissmedic established a dedicated IDMP body for specific needs for Swissmedic and its stakeholders, and the working group is called Swissmedic IDMP Advisory Group. Swissmedic sees the opportunity to eliminate manual data entry to a large extent, as IDMP standards are the key for electronic application form and will improve data quality with data-centric processes. The IDMP standard can also increase transparency and streamline heterogeneous and complicated publication processes. Kristin Arsen from Norwegian Medical Product Agency presented the service project timeline. It includes establishing a medicinal product package or dictionary to the implementation of PhPID from 2022 to 2025. Kristin elaborated a special use case of using PhPID in a hospital healthcare setting. The most precise level 4 PhPID is used to prescribe a medicinal product to treat a patient, but sometimes in the pharmacy at the hospital may not have the exact medicine. The prescribing doctor can then use level 2 PhPID with same substance, same strength to identify similar product in different dose form. Or the doctor may be able to use a level 3 PhPID to identify similar product with same substance, same dose form, and adjust the strength accordingly. Now, this is a special use case, and we have trained healthcare professionals making educated decisions for patients. Norma points out that different use cases may require different strategies in using PhPID for clinical and regulatory decision. The picture here shows that it can be a different PhPID approach for e-prescribing and in-hospital prescription, and also for the regulatory activity during drug shortage and pharmacovigilance. Norma has established business rules for their national PhPID and is testing UMC's global PhPID API that will conduct a gap analysis in Q4 2024. Norma's product dictionary will contain both national and global PhPID so that the two will be mapped and then be used in specific use cases. The roadmap shows that how Norma started with the national product dictionary, transition to IDMP and FHIR, and then enable international data exchange using IDMP standards. Corinne Hay from Health Canada stated that IDMP is essential to model, aggregate, and aggregate data at various scales. Graduate implementation and integration into automatic platform and business tool is their approach. Establishing a policy, procedures to support the metadata management is also needed. Canada believes a common language to describe health product or medicinal product across regulatory documents can provide benefit to the regulators, industry, and healthcare system. Creation of meaningful information source can provide better value to stakeholders, and improved traceability of information, making information more transparent to decision-making and ownership. The last set of presentation about HL7 FHIR is presented by Panagiotis Telonis from EMA. A high-level representation of UMC PhPID operating model is shown here. On the very left, when a requester needs a PhPID, he will submit medicinal product data to UMC. If the substance in the submitted data can be identified, then it will go through the validation process, whether it will map to an existing PhPID or update an existing PhPID or generate a new PhPID. If the substance cannot be identified, then a new SRS record will be created in UMC SRS, and a new global substance ID will be assigned. And that together with the medicinal product submitted to go through the validation process. Now, after the validation process, a PhPID is generated or retrieved, and that was sent back to the requester. And also that PhPID was stored in a repository and published accordingly. HL7 FHIR can be used by the requester to submit medicinal product data for PhPID. UMC can use FHIR to send back PhPID to the requester, and the requester will process a received FHIR message. FHIR can also be used to publish PhPID. HL7 FHIR has a comprehensive set of resources, and we can use various resources to compose PhPID and global substance ID message. A successful GIDWG cross-border healthcare use case was demonstrated in September 2023 HL7 Connectathon. Participants was able to submit a Japanese medicinal product data to UMC for PhPID using FHIR message. UMC sent back PhPID with fire message. And another participant used the PhPID to search for similar product in the US Medicinal Product Dictionary and retrieve complete medicinal product data in file format. So the key message is that file results can support PhPID for global use case. Further work and testing scenarios related to GIDWG operating model workflow is ongoing. Of course, FIRE is not the only solution to exchange medicinal product data, but it is definitely a fairly mature model. And at the end, I would like to thank to the contributors for the slides, and thank you for your time and attention.
All right. Thank you again to our presenters for the fantastic presentations. We will now begin our question and answer panel. If you haven't had the chance to enter your question into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now, and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. And we do have quite a few questions coming in right now. So we have a first question here for Dr. Fitzmartin. First question is, will the IDMP in Europe connected and fully integrate into its US counterpart?
Thank you for that question. Well, so we know that Europe has been implementing IDMP for a number of years. That's the SPORE initiative. So it's a regional initiative. We are focused with GIDWG on global implementation. We are, as many know who are probably on the line, that we collaborate closely with EMA. They are a founding member of the Global IDMP Working Group. So there is a close collaboration on global implementation, but at this point, there is no initiative for connecting systems. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that response as well. Another question for you. Is this system also for vitamins and nutraceuticals as well?
Thank you for that question. No, so IDMP is focused on drugs, biologics, and vaccines. So the answer is no, it is not. Thank you.
Thank you for that response as well. One more question for you, Dr. Fitzmartin. Will this IDMP implementation impact the SPL?
No, it will not impact SPL. So if you look at SPL versus IDMP, the IDMP standards are content standards. SPL is an exchange standard, just like FIRE is an exchange standard. So there won't be any impact. And if the submitter takes a look at the technical specification for 11615, medicinal product ID, you will see references to SPL and that there is a conformance to the standards. Thank you.
Right. Thank you again for that response. Our next question came in addressed for Dr. Olof Lagerlund. What is the relationship between WHO non-proprietary names, or INN, and PhPID?
Thank you very much for that interesting question. Well, it's INN. We work closely with the INN group, and they're part of the GIDWG substance project, so we can leverage on their knowledge and everything. And in itself, it's not a close connection by then INN and PhPID, but most of the products that we assign, just like Ron answered a minute ago, it's not nutraceuticals and not vitamins really, it's basically drugs, which INN assigns names to. So there will be a close collaboration in the future, and much of the different use cases, I would say as well. The INN, yeah, you have the name, so you can use it when prescribing. You don't want to use a code for that, for instance. So it's a close collaboration, and but they're not related as such, but we use them. Thank you.
Thank you for that response as well. Another question for you, Dr. Lagerlund. What is the typical time range it takes to assign a GSID to a substance?
Thank you for that question as well. I would say that it depends a little bit on the type of substance. Like most of the chemicals that's basically we can import from the FDA SRS system, and just to push a button basically, and you get the ID approved because you have the structure, you have the minimal fields what you need. But for some of the more biologics, what should be included, sometimes it's older, you need to try and find out disulfide bonds, etc., details about it. So they might take a bit longer, but hope and vaccines is something we're starting on right now, trying to figure out how to get that on a global level. So I would say fairly quickly for most of them. And then if it has an INN, it will of course be easier even for more tricky biological products or cell therapies or such. Thank you.
Thank you again for that response. And now we'll move into some questions that came in for Taja Chen or TJ Chen. So, first question for TJ. Does the FDA plan to share NDC codes equivalent to ISO, IDMP, PID with WHO UMC for inclusion in the WHO Drug Dictionary?
Thank you. That's a good question. And as Olof presented in one of his slides about a regional or local IDs, yes. A simple answer to that is yes. During the end-to-end test, when we submit the FDA marketed product, we did include NDC code as a submission to the UMC to generate PhPID. So yes, a simple answer is yes. Whether it will be included in the WHO WHO Drug Dictionary, that will be another story. But definitely we will submit NDC to be connected with PhPID. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And we have another question for you, TJ Chen. When does the agency expect applicants to implement IDMP to submission documents for existing dossier prior to the implementation? Does the agency expect applicants to update the dossier and product labeling with IDMP?
Again, that's a great question, and that's a difficult question. But as we presented earlier, that FDA have been using standards similar to IDMP for years, if not decades, and our intention is continue to use those standards. We are doing what we can do in the background or in the back end to connect those different vocabularies. I think here in particular refers to the dose form. No, we are not going to require the applicant to use any IDMP vocabulary. Continue to use a standard that have been used in FDA. We will connect the difference in the backend. And that should be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that information as well. Another question that came in for you. Could you please develop a bit further who is going to be responsible for the PhPID assignment? Is the expectation that industry makes a submission to the PhPID assigned, or will be assigned by the HA?
Thank you for that question. As Ron mentioned, the GIDWG is trying to establish a framework so that we support a centralized PhPID maintenance organization. And now as a WHO UMC, that's what have been identified. So that's why we conducted so many pilots and end-to-end tests to identify business rules that are required to do conversion. As you see all of presentation, different regions use different dose form and it needs some conversion to get harmonized. Even the strength, most region, the example you saw that most region use 80 milligram, but one particular regulator go down to 18.06 milligram. But they are same product, right? So we need to develop business rule to make sure that we can actually connect them together. And with that, we need to have a centralized organization with a capability like UMC to maintain that business rule so that we can generate the PhPID consistently. And so, yes, that will be one organization for now identified as UMC to be responsible to generate PhPID. Now, does industry need to submit PhPID? I think that depends on the region. I believe in EU, EMA may have some regulation that will ask for the PhPID, but not in the US. But in terms of getting PhPID assigned, that is something that have been still being discussed within GIDWG. Most likely it will be submitted by a regulator when we receive a new drug, either during the approval process or right after approval. Then information may submit to UMC to get a PhPID generated. But again, depends on the regulator. Some region may need PhPID earlier than other regions. So that request may be earlier than other regions. So that's a short answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. And so now we have a question for Dr. Ron Fitzmartin. How can regulatory authorities become members of the GIDWG?
Yes, hi. Thank you for that question. Membership is generally open to any regulatory agency. Certainly, internally, you need to be aligned with the mission of global implementation. What I would recommend is that you reach out to the GIDWG leadership. You could send an email to me, Olof, TJ, and what we have done with a number of regulatory agencies recently is set up a series of onboarding sessions, which brings the agency up to speed on the work that we have done and work that we're doing now, and some planned projects for next year. And also, as much as possible, it's always good to participate in these projects that we're working on to make sure that the IDMP standards are fit for global use. So whatever expertise you have is always welcome. Thank you for that question.
And thank you for that response. We have another question for you as well. Given the importance of IDMP in managing medicinal product shortages, how will the implementation of global identifiers help address real-time supply chain issues, especially during emergencies like pandemics?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. So the implementation of global identifiers, what we're thinking should help address supply chain issues by enabling faster identification of medicinal products across regions. In emergencies such as pandemics, when supply chains get disrupted, IDMP will allow regulators, healthcare providers to swiftly recognize alternative products, substitute products, by using the standard identifiers such as global PhPID. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. And we have a question that came in for Dr. Olof Lagerlund. It was mentioned that the end-to-end tests did not specifically select easy products, but approximately how many products were used in the end-to-end tests?
Thank you for that question. Well, it was about 2,300, something like that. It was based on a set of 150 substances, and then corresponding salts to those substances as well. And the tricky ones was that we took like both new ones that's well described via the INN, for instance, and then some some old and some really old products as well. So the level of information that was available in the different countries that we looked in the different labels differed quite a lot, and so on. The labels are getting better and better if you look at it globally, so that's a good thing. More standardized, but still it's is some issues there. So that's why it's also sometimes tricky with substances or products that they are quite old, some of them. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you for that response as well. Another question for you, Dr. Lagerlund. If you don't get any clear guidance from the 5-region verification, how do you handle it?
Yes, thank you very much for that as well. Let me see. Well, the 5-region verification is like when we see that there are differences between regions that we want to address. For instance, as the example I had in the presentation with international units and milligrams, we can see that there are differences. So we try to pick different couple of products from each region. But if in case like they are 50-50, how should we do? Then we go and discuss this with the experts in GIDWG. We both with IDMP experts and the ones for different use cases. But like if it's for the units, we go to the strength experts that deals with that a lot, coming from pharmacopoeias and so on. So we can really see this is probably what should be used, that we will then use. And then we'll write some kind of, because we have to choose something, otherwise we will stand there in between. And sometimes we hope the choices are the correct ones. Otherwise we have to change later on, but hopefully not. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response as well. So we may have time for just one more question. We'll do one more question that came in for Taojian Chen. The question is, will industry have to report E2B R3 with IDMP included in the future? And if so, when will this be mandatory?
Thank you for that question. Again, that's a great question. So some of you may know that IDMP actually was initiated by ICH together with the ICSR or the E2BR3. Mainly is to support the E2B reporting for a unique medicinal product, pharmaceutical product, and substance ID. So E2B has IDMP data element built in. Those are now optional data element. So when IDMP is available, ICH E2B will issue guidance and advise reporter how to use IDMP, like MPID, substance ID, and PhPID in the ICSR report. Now, whether it's going to be mandatory, the data elements itself, the MPID, PhPID, and substance ID, the data element in the E2BR3 is optional data element. So it's not going to be a mandatory. However, an identifiable medicinal product need to be included in an ICSR. So it could be the product name or the MPID or the substance name or the substance ID, either one of that. So it's not so mandatory per se, but that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you again for that response. And looks like that's all the questions we have time for. So another thank you to our presenters for all the excellent information and insights.